When night descends upon the Andes Mountains, mist engulfs the high peaks, as if they were curtains of cloud hiding ancient secrets. Here, in a land where the air touches the sky and rivers thunder through deep valleys, a civilization was born. It knew neither paper nor pen, yet it wrote its existence in stone and in the terraces carved into the mountain slopes. A civilization that built roads embracing the clouds and sacred cities that still evoke astonishment to this day. This is the Inca civilization, the sons of the sun, who looked to the heavens and found a god, turned their backs on the sea to cling to the mountains, and created an empire, the last great empire on a distant continent, before the arrival of the footsteps of the European invaders in the 16th century. Our story tonight is not merely a tale of kings and temples, but of a legend that started from a lake and expanded to include mountains, rivers, and endless roads. Let us open the first page of the Inca story together. The legend narrates that a ray of the sun sent forth from the depths of Lake Titicaca a sacred couple, Manco Capac and his sister, Mama Oclo. They emerged from the water carrying a golden staff. It was said that the gods commanded them to plunge it into the earth, and where it sank easily, there the heart of the empire would be built. The couple traveled between the hills and valleys, but the staff would not settle until they reached a high valley in the Andes Mountains. There, the staff plunged into the fertile earth without resistance. Manco Capac then stood and said, "Here will be Cusco, the heart of the sun and the center of the world." The story transformed into a real beginning. From a legend that emerged from the lake's waters, the nucleus of a civilization was born, which would, over the centuries, grow into an empire stretching from northern Colombia to southern Chile. An empire described as the land of the sun, where the emperor himself was viewed as the sun's son and representative on earth. This beginning was not just a tale told by the fire, it became the cornerstone upon which the Inca Empire was built, the last and greatest civilization before the Spanish arrival in the continent of South America in the 16th century. And so, the first features of a civilization arose, a testament to human genius and its eternal yearning for the sun. But what was this capital like, founded by the sons of legend? Cusco, in the eyes of the Inca, was more than a city, it was the heart of the empire and the secret of the world, as they called it. When one arrives at its high valleys, one sees a city built with astonishing precision, so much so that one might imagine the stones in it are not inanimate but living beings placed in their positions by divine will. Its streets intersected like carefully drawn threads, all leading to the great plaza, where the grandest temple stood. It was no coincidence that the city was built in the shape of the puma, the sacred animal to the Inca. Its head was a fortified citadel on the hill, and its tail meandered in the narrow streets, while its heart was the Sun Temple. In the Coricancha Temple, which the Spanish later knew as the Temple of Gold, the walls shone with gilded plates that reflected the sun's rays on all who entered. There, priests offered their prayers to the sun god, Inti, and there, people felt they stood on the threshold of heaven. The temple stood at the center of the city, like the heart pumping life into the veins. Around the temple, palaces, plazas, and smaller temples spread out, while the common people lived in simple stone houses built to protect them from the bitter mountain cold. There was no chaos in Cusco's design, everything had a purpose. The roads, the plazas, and even the direction of the windows were all set to serve the system, religion, and politics simultaneously. The fascinating thing is that the stones of Cusco still astound engineers today. Each stone was carved to adhere to the next without mortar, so tightly that a knife blade cannot slip between them. Yet, these walls have endured centuries of earthquakes and storms, while the modern buildings around them have collapsed. Cusco was not just a place for dwelling or worship but a stage for great rituals and the launching point for decisions that changed the face of the continent. From its paved streets, news traveled along the long mountain roads to reach the farthest point of the empire. Thus, Cusco became a miniature image of an entire civilization, encompassing power, faith, and the order that bound thousands of villages under one flag. But life was not confined to the temples and plazas alone. On the mountain slopes, there was another world pulsating with life, a world created by farmers and stone terraces, where life was connected to the earth, water, and cultivation. From here begins our next story of daily life among the terraces in the high Andes Mountains. The land was not easy to cultivate, nor was the rain always sufficient. Nevertheless, the Inca transformed this harsh nature into a vast garden on the mountain slopes. They built stepped stone terraces that stretched as far as the eye could see, standing resilient against time and storms. These terraces protected the soil from erosion and collected rainwater to irrigate the fields. In these fields, life was centered around maize and potatoes. Maize was a sacred grain, eaten, used in drinks, and offered as a sacrifice to the gods. The potato was the soul of the table. They even invented a special way to preserve it known as chuno. Potatoes were left in the bitter cold for long nights, then dried under the sun, turning them into food that could be stored for many years without spoiling. In this way, they secured their food supply in years of drought and famine. Daily life proceeded at a collective rhythm. At sunrise, men went out to the fields, carrying simple tools of wood and stone, while women stayed near the houses, spinning wool and grinding grain. Children were not far from this world. They helped from a young age, gathering firewood or herding the llamas that carried burdens. The water canals the Inca dug flowed between the terraces like arteries, carrying water from distant springs to every field. This system was not random but a meticulously studied network, some parts of which still function to this day. However, behind this daily activity, life was not merely cultivation and food. The earth itself was part of the spirit, working it was worship, and harvesting it was gratitude to the gods. Every season passed with a small festival, and every harvest was celebrated as a victory over the mountain's harshness. Thus, the Inca lived their lives among the terraces, simplicity mixed with genius, and labor combined with faith. A life that not only built sustenance for a people but also rooted a collective spirit that many other nations had not known before. Although the fields provided their daily sustenance, the society was not solely based on agriculture. People had roles and duties organized by their groups and relationships in a precise social system, which will take us to the next story on family and society. The individual in Inca society did not live alone but was part of a larger fabric called the Ayllu. The Ayllu was not merely a small family but a cohesive group comprising dozens of families who shared the land, water, and labor. In this system, no one owned the fields alone. The land belonged to everyone, working it was a shared duty, and the harvest was divided among every household. Marriage in Inca society was a simple but important event. In some areas, it was done with a modest dowry, and in others, it was chosen by the village council. The entire community agreed that this bond concerned not just two people but the entire Ayllu. The celebration was not boisterous. People gathered for a small feast, sharing food and drink, and then the new life began, where the couple integrated into the group's duties. The social system was strict but organized. At the head of every Ayllu was an elder or chief, the curaka, who organized work and distributed tasks. Under his authority, everyone lived in a communal system where there was no place for absolute individualism. The community decided and led, and the individual had only to participate and fulfill his duties. This balance between the individual and the group made Inca society cohesive despite the harsh mountains and difficult living conditions. They realized that survival was not through individual strength but through the spirit of cooperation that united them. But the Inca did not express their status or identity only through work. They had another tongue that silently narrated their story, woven from wool, feathers, and gold. This tongue was their clothing, which carried symbols of class, authority, and status, and we will see its secrets in the next story: clothes and adornment. Inca clothing was not just a covering for the body but was akin to an open book narrating the story of the person wearing it. From its threads and colors, one could know the owner's status, his job, and even his social class. In remote villages, farmers wore simple clothing made of llama wool, thicker and coarser than others, but resistant to the cold of the mountains. Men wore rectangular pieces tied on the shoulder, while women wore long garments covering the body, fastening them with hand-woven belts. The colors were not bright but natural, derived from plant dyes and earth. The nobles, however, lived in another world of elegance. Their garments were woven from fine alpaca wool or cotton brought from the warm plains. They were dyed in strong colors. Red symbolized strength, yellow was a sign of the sun, and purple was rare, worn only by people of influence. On top of that, they added golden jewelry, colored beads, and exotic bird feathers brought from the tropical forests. The emperor had his own unique attire that no one dared to imitate. He wore a majestic garment called an unku, woven with delicate lines and geometric patterns symbolizing the sun and the mountains. On his head, he placed a golden crown adorned with bird feathers, shining under the daylight as if it were an extension of the sun itself. Even his sandals were distinct, carefully made, a sign that he was the son of the sun and the ruler of the earth. Gold for the Inca was not a wealth to be saved or traded, it was a sacred symbol. They called it the tears of the sun. Thus, they decorated their clothes, necklaces, and bracelets with it to carry a part of the sky's light in their daily lives. Adornment was not limited to clothes and jewelry. Some men wore small gold discs in their ears, so much so that the nobles were sometimes nicknamed the big-eared ones. Women, in turn, used large metal pins to secure their clothes, and these pins themselves were engraved pieces of art. Thus, clothing became a means of expressing identity and status, and adornment became a silent language known to all. From the simple llama wool to the gleaming sun gold, every thread and every stone told a story of status and role within society. But these appearances were not the only thing that brought people together. There was another, stronger link, a spiritual and vital bond that appeared in the rituals and festivals they shared. From the colors of the clothes and the adornment of the bodies, we will move in the next story to the rituals and festivals, where melodies meet dances, and daily life dissolves into the sanctity of celebration. Rituals for the Inca were not merely fleeting moments but the heart and soul of life. Every season of the year carried with it a celebration or festival that connected the people to their gods and restored the balance between earth and sky. The greatest of these celebrations was the Inti Raymi, Festival of the Sun. On the 21st of June, when the night is long and the daylight hours are few, thousands would gather in Cusco's great plaza. The priests wore their ornate robes, and the emperor himself was carried out on a golden throne to appear as the son of the sun. In the center of the plaza, fires were lit, drums were beaten, and chants rose in their ancient Quechua language. A sacrifice was offered to the sun, a fermented corn drink called chicha, and sometimes white alpacas were slaughtered as a symbol of purity. This was not the only festival. In the rainy seasons, there were rituals for rainmaking, and in the harvest season, festivals to thank the earth. Every natural event was met with a celebration. On some rare occasions, more frightening rituals took place, such as offering selected children as a sacrifice to the gods. It was not savage in their view but a great honor, as they believed the child would live among the gods in an eternal world. They would choose the most beautiful and healthiest children and present them in solemn rituals on the mountain peaks where the ice meets the sky. In the 20th century, the bodies of some of these children were found preserved in the snow, as if they were still asleep after hundreds of years. Music and dance were an inseparable part of the rituals. Wind instruments made of bone, massive drums, and circular dances that mimicked the sun's movement in the sky, all these made the festival a sensory experience combining sound, movement, and faith. The Inca did not separate religion from daily life. Every harvest began with a prayer, and every journey across the mountains was accompanied by small offerings left near rocks and rivers. Rituals for them were not something separate but a thread that wove all the details of their lives. Thus, the festivals were more than just a celebration, they were a bridge between people and gods, between earth and sky, between past and present. But behind these rituals were deeper stories and myths, tales of gods who created the world and of mountains and valleys viewed as living beings. From the rituals practiced by the Inca, we will now cross into the world of myths and religions, where fact mixes with legend and the entire universe becomes an open book for the spirit. The Inca religion was not merely rituals but a complete world of myths and stories, a world where they saw everything as alive and possessing a soul. The mountain for them was not a silent rock but a being that guarded the villages, and the river was not just flowing water but a path for spirits. The greatest god in their view was Inti, the sun god. They believed he was the father who supplied the earth with warmth and life, and that the emperor himself was his direct son, his representative on earth. They saw every morning that when the sun rose from behind the mountains, it announced the start of a new day of mercy and power. Alongside the sun, they worshipped the moon, Mama Killa, whom they considered the sun's sister, granting light to the night and protecting women and children. They also had a supreme god called Viracocha, the creator of the world, who, according to legends, emerged from the ocean waters to create the earth, sky, mountains, and humans. One of the stories they circulated was that Viracocha, after creating humans from stone, became angry with them when they disobeyed him, so he drowned some in a flood and turned others into rocks and mountains to serve as a lesson. The mountains themselves were sacred to them, they called them apis. They believed that every mountain had a spirit that protected the villages at its base. Therefore, when passing a high mountain, they would leave coca leaves or a little drink as an offering to the guardian spirit. Even the earth itself was a goddess, known as Pachamama, the mother of nature, the protector of crops and water. If her rituals were neglected, people would starve and the fields would wither. These beliefs made the universe an open book for the Inca. Every page told of a god, and every line reminded them that they were not alone on this earth. Religion was not separate from their daily lives but intertwined with every detail, from farming to travel, from birth to death. But amidst this world full of gods, there had to be a system that maintained balance among the people, a system that regulated their daily lives with laws and prevented chaos. From the myths that stirred their souls, we now turn to justice and laws to see how this civilization governed its people without prisons and with a unique system. The Inca civilization was known for its strict system, a system that did not rely on prisons, as was common in other civilizations, but on clear and swiftly executed laws. Its primary goal was to maintain balance within society and ensure that everyone lived in harmony with the earth and sky. The laws were built on three simple but decisive principles: do not steal, do not lie, do not be lazy. These few words were the basis of justice in a vast empire. One who stole food was not thrown into prison but compelled to return what he took and work for the benefit of the group. One who repeated his act could face a harsher punishment, sometimes reaching death. Major crimes such as murder or treason had no forgiveness. In some villages, a killer was thrown from the top of the mountain, while adulterers and traitors were publicly announced to serve as a lesson for anyone considering breaking the social balance. But justice was not revenge but a means to protect the group. At the head of every village stood the curaca, the official who monitored people's lives and ensured everyone worked diligently and that resources were distributed fairly. If a problem occurred, he ruled on it quickly, so disputes did not last and mistakes did not accumulate. Even in the simplest daily matters, the Inca were subject to a rigorous system. One who neglected his land and was punished for being lazy harmed the entire community. One who lied in the tax statistics recorded in the quipu was considered a traitor to the trust of the gods and the emperor. In this way, people lived knowing that the law was present everywhere, not in written stones or documents but in the eyes that watched and in the customs they inherited generation after generation. But despite this strict system, there remained a mysterious aspect to their daily lives, a means of communication and keeping accounts not written on paper but woven with knots on ropes. From the justice that governed their lives, we will now move to the secret of the quipu, the language of ropes that preserved their numbers and messages for centuries. When you hold a simple rope, you might see it as something ordinary, carrying no more than scattered knots. But for the Inca, this rope was like an open book, a complete library of information, and perhaps a language that holds secrets not yet revealed. The quipu, a word in the Quechua language meaning knot, was the tool of administration and memory. It was made of cotton or alpaca and llama wool threads in multiple colors. Each color had a meaning: white referred to silver, yellow symbolized gold, green indicated maize, and brown expressed the earth. On these threads, knots were tied in different sizes and shapes, with each knot indicating a specific number or value. With this precise system, officials could record everything concerning the empire: the taxes collected, the number of inhabitants in each village, the crops from the fields, and even details of the army. Runners carried the quipu from one place to another, crossing mountains and plains to deliver their messages with lightning speed. When they reached the officials, the knots were untied and read as a book. But the quipu was not just an accounting tool. Some researchers believe it carried stories and legends, and that the knots represented more than just numbers, perhaps symbols for words or events. This idea remains a mystery to this day, as the secret of the quipu has not been fully deciphered. It is as if the Inca left us a cryptic code, a silent language that refuses to reveal all it conceals. And perhaps this was intentional, to keep a part of their civilization away from the eyes of the invaders who came after the 16th century. But the Inca did not just leave us knotted ropes. They left a living science in other fields. They knew the secrets of plants and healing methods, and even performed advanced surgeries in ages when the world knew little about them. From the language of ropes, we will now move to medicine and science to see how wisdom mingled with nature in the life of this civilization. In the Inca civilization, medicine was not a rigid science separate from daily life but an extension of nature itself. They learned from ancient times that the earth that grew their maize and potatoes was also capable of granting them cure and healing. They knew the power of wild herbs well. They used coca leaves to alleviate pain and fatigue, especially when climbing high mountains. They also used the bark of certain trees to treat fever and the roots of specific plants to stop bleeding. Their knowledge of plants was vast, so much so that some herbs they relied on are still used in modern medicine today. But our astonishment grows when we learn that they practiced complex surgeries in ancient times. They knew the operation of trepanation, drilling holes in the skull bones, to relieve pressure from injuries or to treat chronic headaches. Skulls found in the Andes, dating back to the Inca, show evidence of these operations, astonishing in their precision. More surprisingly, many of the patients lived afterward, evidenced by the fact that the bones healed again. Medicine was not just surgery and herbs but also spirit and faith. They believed that illness could sometimes be the wrath of the gods or a disruption of the balance between man and nature. Therefore, priests would accompany doctors in some treatments, mixing medicine and prayer, science and faith. Their sciences did not stop at the body. They were experts in astronomy and agriculture. They raised their gaze to the sky, reading the movement of the stars and planets. They knew that the appearance of a certain constellation meant the planting season and the disappearance of another indicated the rainy season. They built precise calendars upon which they based their agricultural lives. The sky was an open book guiding their work. Even in construction, they relied on a science that transcended their daily experience. They built their terraces in a way that conserved water and prevented soil erosion, an advanced engineering method that still amazes scientists today. In this way, medicine and science for the Inca were more than tools for survival. They were a means to understand the world and live in harmony with the mountains, rivers, and sky. From the science that led them to agriculture and healing, we will now proceed to another equally magnificent achievement, a vast network of roads that connected their expansive empire and turned the Andes Mountains into an open book that could be crossed. We move now to roads and architecture, where we see how the Inca built hanging bridges and roads that embraced the clouds. When the Inca Empire stretched across thousands of kilometers, from the mountains of Ecuador in the north to the deserts of Chile in the south, it faced a massive challenge. How could this vast land, spanning high peaks and deep valleys, be connected at a time when they knew neither the wheel nor large draft animals? Their answer was an astonishing road network known as Capac Nan, or the Royal Road. This network extended over 40,000 kilometers, traversing peaks, penetrating forests, and crossing deserts. The roads were paved with stone in some areas and flattened earth in others, but all were intelligently designed to withstand rains, floods, and mountain collapses. Along these roads, they built small stations called tambos. These stations were rest houses where travelers, soldiers, and runners, chasca, would stop. There, they found food, water, and shelter, like arteries breathing life across the mountains. Messages were not carried on horseback but via a network of trained runners. Each runner covered a short distance at high speed, then handed the message or the quipu bundle to another runner waiting for him. Thus, news traveled from Cusco to the farthest corners of the empire within a few days, at a surprising speed for an era that did not know paper or ink as we know it. But the brilliance of the architecture did not stop at the roads. The Inca faced a harsh environment full of rivers and ravines, so they invented hanging bridges made of woven rope. They were crafted from the ichu plant, a type of mountain grass, braided into thick ropes to form bridges that spanned dozens of meters. Crossing them was an awe-inspiring experience as the bridge swayed with the wind, yet remained stable. Most remarkably, villagers gathered every year to reweave these bridges in a collective festival that combined labor and religious ritual. Architecture was not limited to roads and bridges but included cities and temples built with astonishing engineering precision. Massive stones were cut and polished to fit together without mortar, so tightly that the strong earthquakes that struck the Andes over the centuries could not topple their walls. Their stones interlocked like a puzzle, every piece was in its place, as if it knew it was born to stay there. This mix of practical intelligence and artistic creativity made their roads and architecture a living testament to a civilization that did not know paper or iron but wrote its greatness in stone and with human patience. From the roads that connected the villages and mountains, we will now ascend to one of their greatest and most mysterious cities, the city that the fog concealed for centuries before revealing its secrets to the world, Machu Picchu, the lost city. In the heart of the high Andes, where mist wraps like a white shawl around the peaks, stands a mysterious city that remained hidden from view for long centuries. This is Machu Picchu, sometimes called the City of the Mist or the Lost City. This city was built at an altitude of over 2,400 meters above sea level, in a location difficult to reach even today. Its massive stones were precisely aligned so that not even thin paper or a sharp blade could pass between them. The builders did not use cement or iron but relied on cutting and polishing the stones to interlock like pieces of a silent puzzle. But the secret of Machu Picchu was not just in its engineering but in its mysterious location. It is neither close to Cusco, the capital of the empire, nor a large city inhabited by tens of thousands, but rather a hidden sanctuary surrounded by a natural wall of mountains and rivers. Theories abound as to the reason for its construction. Some historians believe it was a private royal retreat, a place where the emperor fled to rest in nature. Others believe it was a religious center where rituals were held near the temples and offerings were made to the sun and the mountains. And some suggest it was a military fortress built to protect trade routes and the mountains from invaders. Whatever the reason, what is fascinating is that the Spanish, who overthrew the Inca Empire in the 16th century, never discovered this city. It remained hidden in the mist, away from the eyes of the invaders, until the American explorer Hiram Bingham arrived in 1911 and lifted the veil from its secrets to the world. Today, when a visitor walks through its narrow streets and sees the remains of its houses and temples, he feels as if he is listening to the whispers of the ancients. The Sun Temple, with its semicircular tower, stands majestic to remind people that this city was built not just for living but to be a bridge between earth and sky. Perhaps the secret of Machu Picchu's magic lies in this strange mixture, its solemn silence, its remote location, and the mystery of its purpose. It is not just ruins but a question hanging for hundreds of years that has not found a definitive answer. From this city concealed by the fog, we now move to another face of the Inca civilization, a face of power and organization, where the army was the empire's beating heart and its authority stretched across thousands of kilometers. Let us open a new page with the army and authority. The Inca Empire, which spanned thousands of kilometers across the Andes Mountains to the Pacific coast, would not have remained cohesive without its organized army and firm authority. The army for them was more than just a military force, it was a tool for unifying different tribes, protecting the roads, and ensuring the continuity of the imperial system. When the emperor, or Sapa Inca, decided on war or expansion, men were summoned from every village. It was not voluntary but a collective duty known as the Mita, where every man served the empire with his labor or his weapon for a fixed period. Thus, thousands of soldiers from different backgrounds gathered under one flag, chanting hymns and raising colored flags that fluttered in the cold wind. Their weaponry varied between long spears, heavy maces, and slingshots that launched sharp stones at astonishing speeds. They did not have iron, as the Europeans did, but they crafted their weapons from bronze and skillfully polished stones. Their armor was made of wood covered with thick leather, sufficient to repel, albeit partially, attacks. The army was not just fighters, they carried builders and engineers with them to construct roads and bridges with astonishing speed wherever they went. If they entered a new land, they quickly began building food warehouses and granaries so their armies could remain capable of fighting without their supplies being cut off. Alongside arms, the Inca relied on diplomacy. They would send envoys to tribes before launching war, offering them to voluntarily join the empire. If they agreed, they kept their local leaders and granted them privileges, but under the supreme Inca authority. If they refused, the army moved, and the sword spoke. At the heart of this organization stood the emperor himself as a sacred symbol. He was the son of the sun, and his orders were not to be debated. Around him gathered a council of nobles and generals who planned campaigns and distributed tasks. Everything was precisely calculated, from the movement of troops to the supply routes. Even messages between the armies were transmitted quickly by runners who crossed long distances carrying urgent orders from one commander to another. The army was not just a tool for expansion but also a means of enforcing internal order. If a village revolted or disobeyed the state's orders, soldiers quickly appeared at its gates, silence prevailed, and people returned to obedience, because the prestige of the army was enough to quell the rebellion. But with all this power, the Inca army was unprepared to face a strange enemy coming from a distant world, equipped with horses, iron armor, and firearms. Their army was formidable against neighboring tribes, but they would stand bewildered before a weapon they had never known. From scenes of power and discipline, we move to another dark page in the story, to the moment of the fall, when the empire's glory turned into internal conflict and shock before invaders who came from across the sea. The Inca Empire lived for centuries believing its sun would never set. But the winds blowing from across the sea brought with them an unforeseen destiny. The collapse did not begin immediately with the arrival of the Spanish but from within, when the empire was divided between two brothers vying for the throne, Huascar and Atahualpa. Civil war erupted between them at the beginning of the 16th century. Many tribes sided with one or the other, and blood was spilled on Cusco's terraces and the Andean plains. Atahualpa ultimately emerged victorious after a long struggle, but he found himself on a throne weighed down by blood and divisions. The victory was fragile, and the empire was wounded. He did not know that strange eyes were watching him from afar. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro arrived with his army from Spain. It was not a huge army, but a few hundred men, yet they brought what the Inca had never known before: fast horses, iron armor, and muskets whose sounds boomed like thunderbolts and disoriented the soldiers who had never heard such a sound before. The decisive confrontation took place in the city of Cajamarca. Pizarro invited Emperor Atahualpa to a meeting and set a trap for him. The emperor came surrounded by thousands of his soldiers, confident that his prestige alone was enough to deter these foreigners. But the Spanish surprised the crowds with fire and iron. In moments, the celebration turned into a massacre. Atahualpa was captured, and the sun fell from his hands. The invaders demanded a colossal ransom, a room completely filled with gold and another with silver. And indeed, treasures were collected from all parts of the empire until the rooms were filled as promised. Despite this, the Spanish did not release the emperor. In 1533, Atahualpa was executed, and the last light of the sun was extinguished in the Andes. The fall was not just the loss of a throne but the collapse of an entire world. The armies that once subdued tribes scattered, the priests who offered prayers to the gods fell silent, and the people who lived for centuries under the imperial system found themselves without leadership. With every day, the Spanish influence spread further. They controlled the cities, seized the lands, and made a great civilization bow under a strange flag. But despite the severity of the fall, not everything died. A civilization, even if overthrown by iron and fire, always leaves a living trace in the people and the land. From the ashes of the collapse, the memory of the Inca still beats, passed down from generation to generation. Here, from the heart of this dark scene, we move to the conclusion of the story, to what remained after the fall, to the legacy and memory that did not vanish with the disappearance of the sun. Although the sun of the Inca Empire set in the early 16th century, its glow has not entirely disappeared. This civilization left a deep mark on the land and the people, as if it were a story not yet completed. The Quechua language, which was the tongue of the empire, is still alive on the lips of millions of people in Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. People use it in markets, homes, and folk songs, as if its words carry the echo of distant ancestors who refuse to be silent. And every year in the city of Cusco, thousands of inhabitants gather to celebrate the Inti Raymi, Festival of the Sun, on the 21st of June, the day of the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. People wear colorful costumes resembling their ancestors' clothes, and drums and ancient flutes sound. In a majestic scene, a man embodying the emperor appears to offer sacrifices to the sun, as if announcing to the world that the spirit has not been defeated. But the legacy did not remain in the rituals alone, it is in the mountains themselves. The Inca terraces are still used for agriculture today, preserving the soil and challenging the difficult mountain slopes. The hanging rope bridges, which are rebuilt every few years, still span the valleys, standing firm against the winds, as if speaking of the defiance of a nation that refused to vanish. As for arts and crafts, they left their mark in engravings, jewelry, and weaving. Those designs filled with symbols and geometric patterns are not just adornment but a coded language carrying messages about the cosmos, the gods, and nature. Through them, one can taste the beauty of a civilization that no longer exists but is still seen in every thread and every stone. Even the small villages in the Andes carry features of the legacy in the faces of the people, in their eyes that contemplate the sky, and in their close relationship with the earth. The impact of a civilization that chose to see nature as a mother, the sun as a father, and the mountains as guardians lives on. The Inca Empire fell, but its legacy proved that civilizations may be defeated by swords, but they do not die as long as memory preserves them. It is as if history tells us, what falls before invaders does not fall before time.